So his life was like a goose of some kind, only he had power of some sort, which was the luck of his own birth and education. He could remember some of the professors and some of his reading, but his pastime or his avocation was half in doubt by his own defiant enthusiasm, which he remembered in the museum one day, but he was an adherent to the idea of his future that it was too early to tell. At first he was skeptical, but the town was flattery itself, and so he had trumped the hand. Maybe he was unsure of himself, but too he had listened well to his father and mother, and so he could rest and figure it all out. He had been released from Bellevue. It couldn't get any worse. The restive in the street, but he was not impatient. Yet in the end, he forgot all those weeks in the office, and he found himself dumped, so to speak, by this or that boss and went to the hospital on Ward's Island happily enough, since it was New York and that was all that counted just then. Like a small girl eating a bit of ice cream on the summer pavement. Only I remembered all this, and it was much later I decided to forget such things. Today he was a little better for the memory of it. That is itself a thing to champion, which slid into home base quite safely. Sebby and I started out to know each other, and just like it, the annual bonus arrived, and so we went to the Firehouse Grill for a beer. Sebby was quite right in her look, and she was easy to talk to, and I felt like the smartest guy in the room. I figured it was the best thing I had ever run into. Maybe she wanted to know me, but I was a guy, and so maybe I would need a lady or a friend of some kind. And the bartender was a guy with biceps shown off by a short-sleeved shirt. I had seen them in the nut house with their muscles. I saw it was so good that I was talking to a lady like it was better than ever. I had about $40 in my wallet, but I didn't feel much like drinking, so after my beer was done, I asked Seti if she was staying or going, and she said she would leave with me, and I put her in a cab to the building where we rented on the same floor. It was like a day at vacation, only now he was a disgrace in several ways, though his mind was active, and so he could tell nearly everything that arose in the newspaper, and the view from his room, which was plenty, since he and his parents weren't speaking. So his several awkwardnesses kept him alone, and indeed it was a fine summer. But he was somewhat hurt by a supposed doctor at a local hospital into a doom of taking pills, so the year was grudgingly to arise and pass then. His place was plenty good, so that the summer set the mood for having the outrages of those who refused to acknowledge him when he had anything to say. He had a bed and a closet and a half room with a window and a sink, and the light was like that of the hot sun in childhood in Illinois, where he was to grow up. And now that he was convalescent, he woke later to go to the delicatessen for a sandwich, and somebody was watching him. This, even though he had been in the hospital. The nurse gave him a shot, and he relaxed on a couch in the emergency room. Later, after discharge, he met a lady in a saloon on 8th Avenue near 50th Street, and he told her he had needed a break from the street and to get a place to stay. Seti was amused with a bottle of beer. She could see through the nonchalance, maybe, that he was an expert, wore his sunglasses for safety of the eye. It was an achievement to find a pair of sunglasses, Some others took offense at his sadness, but he wouldn't change. School of thought existed that said not to change or worry, and he was all for that. He was looking exactly on his day and its picture of the answer, and he could overcome the doubt and the rest of it, but there was little enough to the rest of it. See, the gist of it was something foreign to him, and he had made the decision to be a Christian. So all his problems were answered, but that was a long shot. But he tried it anyway. And to be sure, so he learned to subsist with his Lord happily enough, and that minute was worth $100 in cash. He did not drink much, and too, he went out only at dusk to get a sandwich and a jar of spaghetti sauce for an evening meal later, which is a thing to balm his provincial sort of blood. And it was like a kid at Christmas, even though he was nightly sick. He saw the auto come droning by, and the guy at the wheel had been a friend of his. That day he looked savvy and sound. That was something he wanted. He saw most of this and was headed for Europe with the army, which was a thing that fared so strangely and too inhumane. It was something he would later remember, and he was to claim this halfway glory, in that at least he had been tough enough in the States. Now he was a military failure, but at home he fought the bastards everywhere, and so he dropped from sight, and even that did not much work. He was beset and resentful that what was before him turned out to be so strange, and only a glass of beer on the Kurfürstendamm would make any sense of it. He had learned that women were important in the day and in the night, and the Heinekens would prop him up into some second-hand intelligence, and he was intimidated by the drink, too, on a late night. So he was long overdue. He was out of self-control, and maybe he spoke out so anybody would acknowledge him. He had at least shown there in Germany his memory, and all that was a horror. He was alone in the platoon, but for the prominent guilt of his. He tried to cite Sigmund Freud, but they tried telling him that he was not sick, and so he lost control every few hours. He had shut down in his mind. Too, the answer was to turn to an idea of God. There was no going back to try and right anything between him and his detractors. He learned that he was not cut out for soldiering, and he was half-hearted about it, and it would not hurt much. He figured the captain doctor would send him home, and then he would have the memories. And when I went home to Illinois, this was all secret stuff, until they produced a form which contained then a question about whether I suspected anything was wrong with my mind, and then another question, which I answered truthfully, whether I was prone to hearing odd things when others spoke. And by now I knew the cast-off feeling that I had outlived my youth, and then did not have to perform at any real labor, only take in talks about why we were ill or otherwise importuned upon. To me, for a week, honesty itself seemed to be the devil, but next heard that whatever was on your mind, you would have a formidable hour in your name. And there was the rub, that I had met with a problem which I could only explain away to any who would hear. And this was itself a thing in which to believe. The answers were, I needed to cite all the precedents. In fact, once I knew only a handful of names, and my life was an open book, seemingly written by the powers in the city, who knew what to make of nearly anything. So I had hied to a small town outside Chicago, and the phenomena in the street were absent then. Only when they played the TV in the nursing facility, I took a barrage of double talk about my daily reading and writing, and so stayed in the room later without a playing set. There was in the end no problem in even, and especially, the stuff I mildly noted on the forums. Was life, Godzilla? Or was it the Bible? Or was it Gore Vidal? My memory effulged nearly every afternoon, and that was my pound of flesh. Only the dread at lights out was something I staved off until the pills began to work. To me, self-confidence was an insidious thing. It would provide the mood that was right to ravel literally away from my yesterday. The weathered skin around my eyes I only noticed when looking into a mirror, and it was a question how much I certainly knew, which was plenty, and my luck was good. It was a matter of the heart, that he could stand for a leathery rest, like a cold glass of milk or a cheap cigar, like a memory after a drug toppled it like a token pride, dismayed by a sadness in a book he read, and later another book, holding out like a secret question of feet and inches, as he rested leathery, quiet, assuaged by this contained knowledge itself, when a wholeness. And that was the answer, to pay attention to his bodily state as a quiet or a fluid feeling, and this meant good luck, at which time he forgot the previous weeks, to coast and to cruise like a skiff on the lake that had turned out and reached his own mind. But there was nobody to know, only to look out, of course. It was all luck, or maybe decision. That's all I'll read.